Quality control is a very important topic, and the chain of command plays a large role in its success. So let me ask, who on your job site is responsible for quality control? In reality, quality control is much like safety. Everyone is responsible for quality control. The company needs every individual worker that it employs to take responsibility for ensuring the customer receives a quality project. And here's why. The customer hired your company to provide them with a quality product, and the customer is going to demand that they receive a quality product. If the product is delivered to the customer in a state of completion that is of less quality than the contract documents guarantee, the customer is going to demand that your company go back to work and deliver the product at the level of quality that the contract demands. How many times does your company get paid to perform individual tasks on every project? One time. Your company has to assume that you're going to complete each task included in the entire project properly the first time. If your company included the cost for you to complete a task, take it apart, and then complete it again, they would price themselves out of any future work. What that means to you is that if you cannot ensure that each task gets completed correctly and efficiently the first time, you are in effect running your company into the ground. This is no joke. Your company is legally obligated to write and deliver a paycheck to you no matter how many times you redo that task. No matter how many times it takes you to get it right, your company is obligated to pay you for every minute you spend trying to get that task right. Rework is expensive. Rework is very expensive. I've seen reports that speculate that the cost of rework is up to 3 times the cost of doing it correctly the first time. It's not hard to agree with those numbers when you consider that the cost of rework can include the first installation, the complete removal, and then the reinstallation of new material. And this is assuming that the material was installed, removed, and reinstalled within the time constraints of the original estimate. Can you see how these costs could exceed even 3 times the normal cost of installation if the material is not installed at the estimated rate of installation? This is often the case where employees don't install material correctly, because if employees are struggling to install material correctly, they are probably struggling to install it on budget as well. Can you see how important it is for every worker to use their own knowledge and skills to ensure that tasks get completed correctly and efficiently the first time? Every worker, from apprentice to president, needs to speak up and offer their opinion and perspective if they see any substandard or incorrect materials and work being installed. It's just that important in order to ensure material gets installed correctly the first time. Think of it this way. The electrical estimate only includes the cost to install material one time. If the wrong material gets installed or the correct material gets installed wrong, you could easily spend 3 times the estimate budget to get it installed correctly. Since there is no allowance in the estimate budget to remove and reinstall the material, that money has to be robbed from 2 other similar tasks. Now you have 2 future tasks to complete with no money whatsoever to cover the material or labor costs. Get it? Rework is expensive. Rework is really expensive. In order to ensure that all members of the contractor's team participate in working to complete tasks properly the first time, there exists a chain of command. The chain of command exists to ensure accountability by providing multiple levels of oversight. Each level, either by official documentation or by implication, acknowledges their approval of the quality of the installation. The further up the chain we go, the further away from the actual installation we get, meaning the electrical foreman is the closest to the installation and therefore best positioned to recognize and identify improper workmanship. Even so, it's amazing how far substandard work can be allowed to go up the chain of command before it gets recognized and corrected. It's very important to understand that the further substandard work makes it up the chain of command, the more expensive the correction may be. For instance, let's say that the installation crew roughs in a pair of sconce lights next to a fireplace. The work gets inspected, passes inspection, and gets covered by drywall. Next, the finishes are applied. The drywall's finished, texture's applied, the walls are painted, expensive wallpaper is installed, and the brick is placed over the wall, including the sconce light outlet box locations. Finally, the sconces are installed. The carpenters bring in a solid wood mantle for final installation, and it is discovered that the sconce light outlet boxes were installed 12 inches lower than directed on the contract drawings, and the sconce lights hang down where the wood mantle needs to rest. How much is this rework going to cost? 3 times the estimated amount of installation? 4 times? 10? How are you going to raise those boxes with brick installed in front of them? Are the brick mason, drywaller, and painter all going to remove and replace their work for free? Probably not. Let's take a look at the traditional chain of command. As a foreman, depending on the complexity of the project, my experience tells me you should be able to manage between 8 and 10 electricians effectively. On larger projects where they're warranted, from my experience, one general foreman should be able to supervise up to about 5 foremen. Just for the sake of argument, let's say that a superintendent might oversee 10 general foremen. All businesses are different, and from my experience, companies are all over the board on structure and responsibilities for each classification. Rather than dictating how many workers each position should supervise, my goal here is just to illustrate a good chain of command. Other than foreman, in my opinion, a good foreman should be able to manage 8 to 10 workers, period. The rest of the structure can be dictated by the company, but what I've shown here is a good starting point. Normally when we talk about chain of command, this is what everyone imagines. The crew reports to the foreman reports to the general foreman, and the general foreman reports to the superintendent, right? And God forbid, you don't want to skip a loop in the chain, do you? Have you ever done that without asking permission first? What happened? Got your ass chewed, maybe? Why? Because it makes your immediate supervisor look like either they aren't doing their job or don't know how. Nobody likes that. That same exact chain exists in the other direction as well, although few companies observe it. I believe that the reason it is seldom observed in this direction is ego. The big boss figures, since he's so darn important, that he can talk to anyone he wants to, and it creates absolute havoc. Those of you who have kids might have already experienced the results of this firsthand. Have you ever had your kids ask your spouse if they could do something like spend the night at a friend's house and been told no, so they come to you with the same question? Then if you say yes, they pit you both against each other. Well, it's the same result with the chain of command. If your high-level supervisors let your workers come to them with their problems and requests, that supervisor is totally destroying your authority and your ability to manage your crew. Do not permit this. Granted, It can be a difficult discussion to have, but nothing is more difficult to accomplish than trying to manage a crew that knows they don't have to respect your authority. So find a way to explain this to the offending supervisor. I once worked for a $240 million petrochemical company that was owned by a Palestinian ass chewer. I really loved and respected that guy, but he could get really unruly at times, and he didn't respect any chain of command. Everyone knew that if they didn't like my directive, they could just go speak to him and he'd let them do things any way they wanted to. Most of my subordinates really liked me and stayed away from that type of behavior, but there was a welder there who went by Mac that really felt he should have gotten my job when I was hired. Mac was constantly undermining me. This is where I learned that if someone under your supervision believes that they should have gotten your job when you get promoted or hire into a new company like I did, fire their ass as quickly as possible. Anyway, this old chemist brought me into his laboratory one day and showed me his latest concoction, which was essentially a 4-hour-long controlled explosion. It was a polymer product that required injecting some type of catalyst that caused a huge thermal reaction every time it was injected, so it had to be closely controlled. He had perfected his method and had a local university design a system that would permit him to produce about 2,000 gallons at a time, and he wanted me to build it for him. The process involved a huge tank called a chemical reactor filled with some type of liquid that he was going to pump out of the bottom of the tank, inject with the catalyst, immediately send through a heat exchanger to cool the reaction as soon as it was injected, and then dump it back into the tank where it would be diluted by mixing it with the liquid in the tank. The feed rate of that injection had to be just right so that it wouldn't overwhelm the cooling, or it could expand too much and cause real problems. He assured me that if I got the feed rate wrong, it could easily blow the chemical reactor right off the ground. There were a lot of parts to this puzzle, and he only gave me so much room in his factory to place this contraption, which meant I needed a 2-story skid to mount everything on. I procured submittals on all the equipment that would be required, gathered measurements, tested different layouts, and designed all the piping, equipment layout, and electrical, including conduit and control panels. I used that to design this 2-story skid that everything would be bolted to. It was tight, real tight, and moving even one component meant jostling everything around. Mac liked to change my designs all willy-nilly, and that irritated me. But on this project, I had absolutely no room for changes. There were just too many parts that had to be fitted just right, so I was up his ass. I almost stood right over him while he built the skid so I could make sure he didn't improvise. One morning, while I wasn't in the welding shop, the chemist walked in and struck up a conversation with Mac. Mac told him, "Hey, Gene, don't you think this thing right here would be better if I moved this part over here?" Gene had no idea what the hell he was talking about, but figured he was the welder, and if that's what he thought, then he should probably do it. Mac, without missing a beat, told him, "Well, I would do it, Gene, but Dennis is micromanaging me, and he won't let me build it the way I know it should be." Now, I already told you this chemist was a hothead, but his favorite tactic was to demote people if he got mad at them. He would demote them, still make them do the same job for a while, and then re-promote them. That chemist called me lickety-split and informed me that Mac told him I was micromanaging him. Because of that, he was going to demote me, and from then on I would only be responsible for the electrical department. I responded by telling him that that wasn't going to work for me, and he'd better start looking for a maintenance manager and an electrical manager. He spent the next 5 years of his life trying to get me to come back to work for him. Don't let managers skip the chain of command in a downward direction. Sometimes there are issues on a project that really hack supervisors off. So they all band together to discuss the problems. Since they all like each other, none of them wants to accept the responsibility. So they bring the whole crew together and the big boss yells at them. Usually, they tell the crew that the situation is intolerable, and if anyone gets caught doing it again in the future, they're going to be fired immediately. People who don't know how to manage like to threaten people with their job. Don't ever do that. Ever. If you're going to fire someone, then just get it done and do it privately. Don't talk about it. Most of the people that have to listen to talk like this never did anything wrong in the first place, and many of them do things perfectly correct every day. Why should they have to listen to that nonsense? Why would you ever want to make them feel unappreciated and angry? What did that big boss just do? He jumped the chain of command in a downward direction and made the entire crew angry by threatening their job. Do you think that crew is invigorated and anxious to get back out there and bust their butts for him? The last thing that higher level supervisor wants is for the crew to dislike him, and there's no need for it. If that crew needs reprimanding, that is the foreman's job. The crew needs to like upper level supervisors because that is how they're going to form their overall opinion about the company. It is possible to be hacked off at your immediate supervisor and still like the company overall. If the foreman is required to handle his own business and does it properly, the crew should respect him or her and like them as well. Remember that shit sandwich? Just to be clear, I'm not saying that it is never acceptable for higher level supervisors to speak to lower level workers. I'm a huge advocate of higher level supervisors mingling with lower level workers. But these conversations need to be positive and upbeat. And if a crew member wants to use that time to pitch a grievance or suggestion, the higher level supervisor should refer the worker back to their immediate supervisor by reassuring the worker if their immediate supervisor can't handle their issue, they will take it up the chain of command. Higher level supervisors need to create goodwill for the company by praise and appreciation where it's warranted. Nothing more. If the higher level supervisor has a complaint, they should push it down the chain of command and let lower level supervisors address the issues. Since we touched on threatening people with their jobs, let's close by discussing how to let someone go if the situation warrants it. Terminating someone doesn't have to be a mean thing. You should start the process by giving them 3 opportunities to correct the offending behavior. The first will be an informal discussion about the behavior in the form of a shit sandwich, which you'll document in your daily log. The second will be a written reprimand. If your company doesn't have a formal form for documenting the incident, you can find a disciplinary form online and use that. When the day comes that you need to release someone, don't drag it out. Talk to them privately and make sure you let them know that you don't dislike them, that you dislike the behavior. Let them know that it's gone on too long and you're going to have to replace them. I always let them know that somewhere down the road, if they're able to get past their issue, that I would welcome them back to work with me again. I also let them know that I would be willing to give them a good reference for their next job. I don't know what their issues are, but I do know that most people learn from their mistakes. I prefer to be an optimist and wish no one ill will. So I believe in giving people a fourth chance through a good reference. Now, what's going to happen if I give this worker a good reference to work for one of my competitors and he falls on his face and loses his job there? Maybe my competitor's going to lose some money. Maybe they'll lose enough to have to raise their pricing and make me more competitive. In the meantime, I've been a decent human being and offered that individual his fourth chance to overcome his issues and become a valuable employee, right? Always think the best of people. Give them a break and give them a chance.